Our next candidate is Jason Klein, House candidate for District 22. Jason is a lifelong Alaskan who grew up in Anchorage and Valdez. He is currently working on his master's degree in business administration and management at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Please welcome Jason Klein.
How are we doing tonight? Thank you everybody for coming out. Tell you a little bit myself, like she said, I'm Jason Klein. I've grown up in Alaska my whole life. Commercial division out of Valdez for many years. I've lived in Anchorage, graduated from the Anchorage School District, graduated from UAA as well. A lot of people have asked me, what was my desire to run? Why am I doing this? And it's from looking around and realizing what's going on around us and saying, something's wrong. We see the excess and we talk about it in Washington, we see it all day long, but for this country to turn around correctly, and for this to happen right, it has to happen on every state, in every city, in every district. We need to cut the excess. We're seeing city budgets in the deficit by the millions, states by the billions, and like we know, our federal government, you have to use your imagination. It's just not happening anymore. We need to have change happen, real change, for sustainable economic growth in every district, like I said. In Alaska, that means developing more of our natural resources we talk about. Dave's question of energy. Is it energy, hydro, wind, geothermal? I think it's diversification of all of those things, but more importantly right now we need to focus on what we have, and that's oil and gas. Ensuring that the taxes and we have a conducive environment for investment. And renewable energy, yes, in the long term, but as it is right now, and until we can go down to Home Depot and pick up a new solar panel for our house, I don't think it's economical. And I think when it does come economical, the private sector will make it happen. So my desire to run, like I said, is looking around and seeing the excess happen on every level and saying, let's stop this. Let's make sure that we can have a future for people my age, people your age, and children and grandchildren as well.
Thank you, Jason. And will you give us your opinion on a biennial budget?
Yeah, I think Gabrielle made a very good point, is that our state is heavily dependent upon our oil revenues. Having a very dynamic budget process, annual, I would support more of an annual budget. Yes, it probably does save time and money now, but if we can't have a responsive fiscal budget every year to make sure that we can deal with deficits correctly and we can deal with spending correctly, I would support an annual budget at this point, because I think the long-term savings with having a dynamic and responsive budget would be something I would support.
Any questions from the audience? Please.
I think I should actually speakers' comments. You may all speakers here today. But you go down to Juneau, if you're elected, you're going to take an oath to uphold the state constitution. The state constitution requires that they fund education, public education in Alaska. Now, being a property owner, facing increasing property taxes in this town, and not having anybody or any children in the school district have to that property tax goes to the school district. How do you feel about maintaining the status quo of things that the state pay percentage and local districts being taxed first property owners, or do you feel that the state should pay for all that the state constitution mandates? In other words, how do you give us some proper relief?
Yeah, I'll start. This is something I get very lucky that many people advise me, and Mark Fish, who has been very helpful in my campaign as far as it's a huge advocate for 100% state-funded education level, and I think it's a good idea possibly if we can start looking at numbers, but I think property tax owners and helping fund the education can also create a connect between who goes to the school and what happens at the school. So having some amount of input on the local level in your education funding, I think, is necessary. I don't think 100% funding on the state level is where you want it, because with education, I think the more local, the better. Funding with the state level, I think the state needs to take a larger share in that, because as you said, the Constitution does mandate that it funds public education. But I think, like I said, every district has to start looking at these things. The school board's budget has grown double its size in just 10 short years. They finally started cutting the budget this year, but I mean, they're twice the size of the municipality here in Anchorage. They need to start looking at cutting programs that don't work, for alleviating property tax owners, for property taxes for property owners. I think that's where it has to happen. Leadership has to happen at every level. And And it's not just about who's going to fund it, it's going to be about why is it costing so much.
Another question for Jason?
All but again. You mentioned property taxes, another favorite issue of mine. And I was curious, a lot on these exemptions that you mentioned. A lot of them are mandated from the state who gets exempt on property taxes, but yet they don't come up with the funding that is missing, and that those exemptions are paid for on the backs of the property taxpayers themselves. So how would you address that issue in the state as far as getting the state to, or encouraging your peers to actually fund the exemptions that they so easily give out?
Right. Well, this is something I've been actually doing some research on. I have some friends that have been doing some research for me. My opponent actually voted against the property tax exemption for religious property owners, which would benefit a place just like this. Everything is about making the state take advantage of what they're responsible for. Looking at transportation and the cost of maintaining the roads here in Anchorage, there are plenty of state roads that the state's not taking care of now that, again, falls in the municipality's budget. I think in any way that we can make the state take more advantage of its responsibilities, I think that's necessary, because the state's funded obviously largely by oil revenues, and we can do things to create oil revenues, but property taxes are the only way we can fund things on the city level. And as Mark knows, it's the only type of taxes where they can take your property away if you don't pay your taxes. So in any way that we can mitigate the growth of property taxes, I'm generally for that. So I would apply that perspective.
Yeah, I have a question. Anchorage is unlike the rest of the state in the sense of its economy, business. It is kind of a magnet for all the state and all the communities in the state to come here to shop and do business, and for the whole world to come to Anchorage as they go out to the rest of our state. But the rest of our state doesn't have the same economy as Anchorage. And how
Jason, let it in the back.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, they want to hear your question.
Okay. I guess my question would be, how would you get the economy out of Anchorage and spread it around the state? How would you get that out?
So the question for anyone that didn't hear, we have a very different type of economy here in Anchorage, a lot different than we do have in the rest of the state. Due to its rural nature, obviously we have a very large state. And so what can we do to create better economies in rural areas? And one thing, the toughest thing is you don't want to get government too involved in the planning of economies. That's generally where things go bad. You want to let the private sector grow where the private sector can. Creating incentives, incentives matter, there's no question. So creating incentives for urban growth, looking at how the valley's been growing. It's been growing massively over the last 10 years, whether the valley residents like that or not. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. And I think the biggest thing we can do is just create incentives for private property ownership. The state is less than 1/3% of private property ownership, and I think increasing that private property ownership could grow economies massively. So,
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. Next candidate is Ron Slebecki, candidate for Senate Seat J.